Perfect. So if you have any questions during the presentation, you can type them in the chat box, or you can hold off to the end and we can talk about anything we're going to be discussing. And I'm going to bring up the share screen. There we go. So as you can see, for this Curator's Corner, we are going to be discussing World War I, and specifically World War I back home here, and the perceptions of the Great War that was fought in Europe, which at the point in time were primarily derived from newspapers and newsreels. But here at History Fort Lauderdale, we have some artifacts from our collections that provide an alternative ways for people back home to view the war, both during the war and immediately after the war. So you're looking at this slide. It is not objects from our collection. And while we are going to be looking at items and images from our collections, I had a bit of an epiphany while speaking with Sheila, who's on this call right now. She's responsible for putting together a good chunk of this. She's definitely the one who found all the objects and items. And if she were here, she would be giving this presentation, but she's not. She's in North Carolina. But I thought it would be neat to include pictures that I took while I was traveling over in Europe at the Austrian Military History Museum in Vienna. On a side note, for that museum, if you ever happen to go over there, it's one of my favorite museums of all time that I've been to. It's absolutely fantastic. And it's also really cheap to get into, so that was really good. But these photos that we're looking at, the top photo is the clothes that Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in, the car him and his wife were assassinated in, and then the photo at the bottom is the left side of the exhibit when you enter. It's fantastic, highly recommend it. But first, we're going to start with a piece from within our collection, and it's a piece that helped people view the war after the war. This specifically is a program from the Washington Bicentennial Fair in 1932. And it's of the Pantheon de la Guerre, which was a life-size painting designed to display in the round, so as a big circle. And it portrayed the war at the time as both triumphant and tragic. We'll get to that a little bit later as to how the perspective of this specific painting shifted over time. But it was conceived in France at the beginning of the war in 1914. And it was painted by prominent artists at the time. You can see on the left side of, the right side of the screen, the French artists who came up with it, who designed it. And I won't attempt to butcher the French names. Sorry, guys. But in total, the circular panorama was 402 feet in circumference, and it was about 45 feet high. And that's a huge painting, huge. It weighed about 10 tons when it was all packed together, but it holds the apt description of being the largest oil painting in the world. I don't know if that's true though. That's what they said. So while it was heavily French-centric, being painted by the French, 24 countries that participated were represented, and there are panels for the Memorial of the Dead on the right side and the Temple of Glory on the left. And as you can see in the original, the Temple of Glory was surrounded by the French troops. It was displayed in France after the war ended, to much acclaim. About 3 million people saw it. And it remained there until the war started receding from memory, so for about 9 years, when it was brought to America to go on tour. It was as much a tourist attraction as it was a remembrance. So before leaving France, there were additions that were made to the American panel, which is the panel you see before you. The panel added in nurses and African-American soldiers, and it traveled throughout the United States. When it got here, it started in New York City at, Madison Square Garden, and then it ended in San Francisco in 1940. It ended up being laid abandoned for 12 years after its final viewing in San Francisco. It was shipped off to Baltimore and held outside at a storage unit because there was nowhere big enough to house it inside. And the reason it was laid abandoned was obviously because of World War II. So it was forgotten, it was neglected, it was in storage until parts of it were rediscovered. And then in 1956, it was restored by Daniel McMorris. And he was an artist and a veteran of World War I. He had seen the Pantheon while he was in Paris. And at that point in time, he decided to restore it. But he restored it and heavily altered it. He altered it to be very American-centric. And he included prominent US presidents like FDR, Woodrow Wilson, and Harry Truman. The altered and updated and restored Pantheon, it was unveiled in 1959 at the Liberty Memorial in Kansas City, where the largest World War I memorial resides. The program that this photo is of, this little panorama that we did, is of the French version, obviously. You can go online to the Liberty Memorial site and see the updated American version. They just, or well, in 2018, they did a huge article on it, obviously for the centennial. So it kind of came back up into the news and everything like that because it was paraded around the United States, as I said, like a tourist attraction, where in France, it was somber, it was tragic, it was a remembrance of what the war and how much it devastated Europe. But the United States came in so late that they saw as a invigorating and inspiring piece versus the we should never do this again. Another item in our collection that we have that was obviously before movies was the stereoscope. And this device was invented by Charles Wheatstone in 1832. And it's a device that's paired with flat images and that are taken, the images are taken from slightly different angles and they're set at a distance from the viewing device. So you look through one end, as you can see, look at the photos, and your brain combines the two images to be seen as not quite 3D as we know it today, but definitely having additional depth to the images. You had a little mock-up for how you can look at it on the right side. So it still works. Obviously, there's no reason for it not to work. I looked through it when I was taking these pictures. And the cards that were produced, they're produced by the Keystone View Company, which had production all over, well, there's London, Paris, United States, I want to say New York and New Jersey in the United States, and there might have been one other. But the piece holding the two photos, it slides back and forth to help focus the images. And there's also a missing hand grip that can be attached and unattached that would extend from the base. So you'd hold it and then you hold it up to your face, almost like a mask, like a, I was gonna say Mardi Gras mask, but you know. And the views of the cards are of World War I are from photographs, which was at the time a medium that was becoming much more accessible in the late 19th century. So stereoscopy is a photographic technique that's used to create the illusion of depth, and it adds the three-dimensional quality to the images. And the realistic portrayals that we see in this collection present a very somber view of the devastating war. This photos that we're looking at are the camouflaged trenches. But also, if you look at this photo, when it scans and when it scans in color, you can see the anaglyph effect, which is what uses the filters of different colors to achieve that 3D. So when you started first seeing, let's say 3D movies, and you had to get those funky glasses and one eye was red and one eye was blue. So it's the cyan and the red for the images that help give it that 3D effect. And as you saw in the last slide, we'll just go back for a second. You see this writing on the back. A lot of them have exceptionally interesting information that you don't really think about all the time. But one of the quotes on one of the back, or on the back of the top slide that we're looking at with all the men standing there, is when on April 6, 1917, war with Germany was declared. The total strength of the regular army and the National Guard was 307,000. Yet in 19 months, an army of nearly 2 million men were drafted and mobilized in great camps which were prepared for them. They were clothed and fully equipped with arms and ammunition. They were given military training and transported across the sea, where they opposed successfully the soldiers of the most warlike nations of Europe. This was the most marvelous achievement, possibly only when fine men are inspired by the highest patriotism. The bottom left-hand corner is men back from war visiting, or finally visiting, their wives and children. And then the one at the bottom right is a soldier coming back. He ended up going into the Arlington Cemetery for the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. So like I said, each stereogram has a few paragraphs of information on the back of each card explaining the scenes. The one we're looking at is very straightforward. It's called Learning to Use Gas Masks. And on the right side is the Austrian gas masks from the Military History Museum. The stereograms that end up depicting American soldiers are often inspirational on the back. And the last line of the card, which was from the previous quote that I just read off, it said, "All of this is especially remarkable because previous to the opening of this war, the United States was the most unwarlike country in the world." So while we're not going to be seeing them, the stereograms did not shy away from the horrors of war. They were depicted to show their realities to the people living back home. And within the box we have in our collection, it ranges from images of locations. There's one of Notre Dame, there's one of an airfield, and US training parades, to bodies on the battlefields, both human and animal. There's one of multiple horses on the battlefield from the cavalry. And also, as you can see, heavy artillery is another common theme with the stereograms. The information back on the back of these are highlighting the vast production of such equipment. And our stereogram picture at the top shows the same heavy artillery as the Austrian Military History Museum picture at the bottom, as well as the shell casings over on the other side. So while back home during the war, there was a patriotic centered stereograms. After the war, there was a Pantheon, and that was eventually reconstructed to become American centric. And here, when I was going through the Austrian Military History Museum, I was like looking for things about the United States. And this panel at the top is the only mention they have of the United States when it enters the war. Oh, and I should say that the photo at the bottom are of obviously people in the trenches and their foxholes and everything like that. And then the Austrian Military History Museum photo is of the artifacts and that they recovered from the trenches. And finally, we have letters home. And the letters home from soldiers are one of the few ways that at the time men in the service could send news from the war to their families. And these are families that were in Fort Lauderdale, families that ended up coming out of Fort Lauderdale, and they were used on any paper available, as you can see. And often their writing was censored for security reasons, but they are some of the most impactful accounts we have of the war. So here, this one is 2 pages, and it's a letter from Harold Volk to his sister, Belle Philansby, and it's dated September 1918. And it's used on paper with the heading of American YMCA, stamped as active service. And he lets her know that he's safe. The letter is very light. it's faded over time. But he is saying in his writing that the old kid, I haven't been in any fighting, although we are up at the front now in a quiet sector. Photo on the right is of Belle Flansby. She was a well-known actress in the 1920s, and she drove ambulances during the war. However, by December, Harold is writing from the battlefield, and which he describes as a perfect hell, not a living thing except the never-ending stream of troops. He relates how one brave French woman who lived next to his camp had lost her husband and 2 sons to the war. And the photo on the left is of Harold Volk in his uniform. Yeah, he does. I was looking for it. He says to Belle if she remembers the pictures of Dante's Inferno, and that they were tame in comparison. That's before he says that war was the perfect hell. And here we also have a letter from Alex to his sister Maddie from the south of France, which is dated after in April 1919. And on the back, which is the photo on the right, were images of his division's wildcat insignia. And he wrote, as you can see, my cat above next to the blue one. And Alex gives Maddie news that he expects to return home soon, but he urges her to don't stop writing because all of these plans can change in the twinkling of an eye. So while, start the video. We have all these objects, and I almost want to ask Sheila to unmute herself so she can talk about how she found them. Because before doing this presentation and talking with her about it, we don't really think of South Florida as having a lot of World War I objects or artifacts or anything like that. So it was very nice to find these and that there was even a better story involved with them as well. So does anyone have any questions or comments? Do you want to go back and see any photos? Recording in progress. Jane, if you're trying to say something, you echoed. Oh, okay. But like I said, we are History Fort Lauderdale.
So we have to see. I know. So put a little fingerprints for them. They have fingerprints.
Anything?
They say party, party, party.
Let me see. Party, party, you can read that? Party, party. Very good. Very good.
There's only 3.
So we are History Fort Lauderdale.
This will be the hardest.
We have 3 museums here that are open every single day from 10 to 4. We have an open air market every single Sunday if you guys want to come out and see us. And we have our research center as well. Like I said, Curator's Corner will not be happening in November or December. We will start back up in January of the new year. And I want to thank everyone for participating today. It was great to see you all. So if there are no questions, oh, I think there's a chat. Hold on, sorry. Ooh. Nice collection, thank you. All right. You are very welcome, both Mary and Zoom user who doesn't have a name. So if you want to stop by and see us anytime, we are here. Our research offices are open from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. You can email info@flhc.org if you have any questions. And thank you all for stopping in. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Hillary, this is Ron Olm.
Oh, hi, Ron.
Following up from last month while I've got you,
Mhm.
I didn't weigh in last time. You asked if there was anyone local.
Oh, yes, yes.
And I was one. One of the things I want to send you, and it isn't quite complete yet, is I was at Everglades Junior High,
Mhm.
and that was the first integrated school in Broward County. And so I've got the newspaper articles that go with it. I've got my yearbook that actually shows the 6 or 7 black kids that enrolled. Once I get it together, I'll send it off to you, and you're free to use it as you wish. Also, you showed Northside High School. I mean, Northside High School, Northside Elementary.
Mhm.
And I've got photos and documentation that claim that started out as the Progresso Methodist Church,
Oh, interesting.
became the school
Mhm.
with photos of it as the Progresso Methodist Church. So if I can get that compiled, I'll also send that off to you. You can validate whether it makes any sense with what you know. But we've just got a bunch of other stuff going, and that's lower on the priority list.
Always on, we know. But that sounds fantastic. We love extending our collections and everything, so I can't wait to see it. Wonderful.
Okay, enjoy.
Thank you. You as well. Have a good weekend. All right,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Thank you for stopping by.